In this video, we'll be exploring environment variables in Matillion ETL, how they work, and how to set them up in a job. A variable is an object that can hold a single data value of a specific type. Variables can be used in all sorts of parameters and expressions to allow the user to pass and centralize environment-specific configuration. Environment variables are name-value pairs that are stored inside the Matillion ETL client and can be defined or redefined by the user. Unlike job variables, environment variables can be used throughout the client, in configurations, and in all jobs through many components. Environment variables should be used when you want to automatically have a different default value per Matillion environment. Say we have different versions of some data to be run against a job. In this example, we'll use environment variables to control this. We'll be working in an instance with two environments, development and test. We will then create an orchestration job to load files from S3, which will load different files from the S3 bucket, depending on the selected environment. The environment variable will be set to two separate S3 locations for the development and test versions of the data. So, when we run the orchestration job, it will pick up different files depending on which of our two environments are selected. Environment variables must be created or declared before being used. To create an environment variable, click on the Project menu and select Manage Environment Variables. Then, the Manage Environment Variables dialog will open. Here we can see the current environment variables and create or remove them. To create a new environment variable, click the plus button. The following fields will then need to be completed. Name, the name of the environment variable. Type, the Matillion ETL data type of the environment variable. This must be text, numeric, datetime, or data structure. Text is selected by default. Behavior, the behavior of the environment variable will be shared or copied. Copied variables can be updated within one branch of a job without updating variables of the same name in other branches. A branch using the copied variable will begin by taking its default value even if this variable has been updated in another parallel branch. Shared variables are updated in a job-wide fashion, such as, regardless of branches, if a shared variable is updated in one branch, all other branches will use that updated value. Default environment value, the default value of the variable in each environment. The dialog includes a separate column for each environment, and you can see our two environments, development and test, with the default value listed in the column. A variable's default value can be left blank, but failing to give a reasonable default value may cause problems in validating components that use the variable. For example, if a component uses a datetime variable to which you have given a default value which is not in a valid datetime format. And description, an environment variable can optionally be given a description, which is a free-form text field which can contain information about the variable that you wish to record. So we will call our new environment variable directory name with the behavior of shared. For the default environment value, for development we'll enter dev data, and for test, test data. These values correspond with the S3 locations where the data we'll be loading is stored. Now we'll build an orchestration job to load the files from an S3 bucket to our cloud data warehouse. I've created a table in advance which is currently empty for the data to be loaded into. The data will be loaded using an S3 load component. Enter the S3 bucket information. Then, when defining the file to be loaded, we can use our directory name variable. The variable syntax is $, curly brackets, variable name, and then close curly brackets. Now the value for our variable will be used and be different depending on the environment selected. Let's validate that the directory name variable is working correctly. The development environment will need to be selected to do that. We can make sure that the correct environment is selected by right-clicking on Development in the Environments panel and choosing Select Environment. We can now run this job and we can see the variable has used the value defined and picked up our S3 bucket defined to be used when in the environment development. And has loaded this data to our table. Once the job has run successfully, we can sample the data in the table and see that the data has loaded. Now, by changing environment from development to test, we can rerun the same job without changing any of the properties and pick up and load a different file. The environment variable will now use the value defined for the environment test. Then, by rerunning the job and sampling the data once it's complete, we can see the data now loaded into the table is the different data for test as it has been loaded from a different S3 path. To learn more about variables in Matillion and more ways they can be used, you can watch this video about job variables. For full documentation on environment variables, please visit the Matillion documentation site. And to keep up to date with the latest Matillion documentation videos, subscribe to the Matillion documentation channel.